Hello. Welcome
Hey.
to another episode of Cloud Foundry Weekly.
Hello, everybody.
Sorry about that loop there. Looks like back here soon, but yeah, this week, just another great episode of Cloud Foundry Weekly, ready to go. This week we are kind of starting a new kind of mini series within the program. We're going to call it Security Stories with DMZ, or maybe Tales from the DMZ. But if you've seen the show before, we're referring to our special guest star, David Zendzian here. Let's see if Nikki's coming back. All right.
Wouldn't you know it? As soon as the second we go live, Chrome crashes on me.
Yeah.
Chrome.
Well, you got back pretty fast, so yep. We recovered. But yeah, I was just kind of going over the our new kind of little sub program here within the Cloud Foundry Weekly podcast live stream about our security stories with DMZ. So I think without further ado, let's go ahead and bring David back on the show here.
Well, and I think you forgot the important stuff, Nick. Right? You forgot to tell everybody you were out last week. You went to Disneyland.
Disney World
or Disney World. Sorry, I always get the two confused.
Yeah. So Disneyland's in California, Disney World's in Florida, right? So I was at Disney World last week. That's why I wasn't on the show. I was, I think at the time I was sweating profusely in the Animal Kingdom, but it was great. Great time. The kids loved it. Highlight was obviously Star Wars Land. So you can't really get anything better than that. But yeah.
Did you get a chance to get caught up on the data episode that we did last week?
It was really a great episode. I did some work with Gregory back at last, I think, VMware Explorer Vegas. So we had a kind of Cloud Foundry and data tutorial going on with Amelia as well. So that was pretty fun. So it's great to see all the stuff we're doing with Tanzu data and how powerful that is when you kind of plug that into the Cloud Foundry or Tanzu platform ecosystem.
Yep.
And I did get the podcast version published too just a few days ago. So if you're listening, on that format, it's out there as well.
Yep. Well, and the thing is we had seen what Gregory was going to do before the show, and we ended up getting talking, and he didn't make it through 3/4 of the stuff that he wanted to do. So I'm pretty sure that we're going to have Gregory back, maybe split that up and talk about, Gemfire and Postgres and each thing separately so that he can go through his demos. He does a great job of presenting and making information available. So glad you're able to watch it.
Yeah. And thanks to Mark, if you're watching, for filling in as a co-host. So appreciate that as always.
So DMZ, welcome back, man. Another returning guest.
Well, actually, not just returning, but I'm also watching all of them too. Because I myself want to know what everyone else is doing, because there's so many things happening. How do we keep track of all this? And I did like the data episode, and I can't wait to dig into it more, especially as we start really getting into some of the use cases that you can go into it. You can't talk security without talking data. Data is the center of it all. So,
yep.
But Nick, you got me thinking we probably should maybe think about I just got a couple of talks accepted for this year's Explorer. We can probably talk about that in a little bit too, and maybe preview some of the cool things. Hopefully, we're going to talk about there to kind of get people excited about that idea too.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing I do want to say. So, we're doing the security episode today, but this is going to start becoming. We're going to do a reoccurring monthly, show of this security. Now, one of the things I want to ask the audience, right? We came out there. We've got security stories from DMZ. What would y'all like to see as a title for this reoccurring episode? We passed out, Tales from the DMZ breakdown. But to the audience, what do y'all think? What would be a good, segment name for this that we're doing monthly with David here?
Relatively clean name.
Let's see what they come up with. I'd be interested to seeing what they come up with, right? So,
I have my security sticker on the back of my cat. You can see my rack back here. On the other side of the stickers from DEF CON that I can't share on video calls.
Look at that. Keith Lee says hi. He's a big fanboy. Always good to have Keith on.
Hey, Keith.
All right. Well, first let's start. We've got a big thing that we want to talk about, DMZ. So, but first let's start with what's going on with Explorer. We got Explorer coming up in August. You've got some talks. We've got a lot of customer talks. I think I'm giving a talk Nick, did you get cleared for any?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I'm doing a lot of AI talks.
Nice.
I mean, not surprising, I guess, because it's a big.
Yeah, he would have figured.
Yeah, it's a big vibe in the industry
There's so
right
many
now.
things you can actually demo and show now, so it'll be a great. I think that far out, we even have more things to get into, and that's where it's really exciting. I've got one that I've actually gotten confirmation when I logged in. I saw the other, but I haven't gotten the mail for it, so I'm like 80% sure it'll go through because it's in the list.
Yep.
The easy ones of talking security today is compliance, like the easy button for compliance. How do you do that with, I know this is Cloud Foundry, so we're talking about the Taz world, but all of the things in our world of Tanzu, how do you take the output of what we're doing and make that easy button for compliance? It's kind of going to review what Steve White and I did years ago. We talked about how do you audit the platforms, but this is more of the output side. So really trying to show how we can get all these new outputs. And the other, I think the one I'm really excited about, which fingers crossed actually is there. It's in the list, but I'm not getting the email, is actually looking at the Cloud Foundry platform and doing a
jobs.
So now that is borderline, probably not going to get accepted, but good recommendation.
Well, and I guess they know that I'm one of those few security people that I like to talk, so it might be appropriate. We'll have to figure that one out. But the second topic is, looking at the Cloud Foundry platform of security of what's the benefit like in EDR. It was actually with the customer. I can't say customer because they're not gonna have their name on this one, but they are going to come and give their talk of it. What they did is they approached the Cloud Foundry platform and said, hey, if you look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, all the different ways of attacking, but focusing on the data and the AIs actually running containers, what's the attack framework and what's the risks to the platform? Then they had their enterprise, this is a large bank, they had their enterprise red team actually do those attacks and validate their assumptions. And they decided to save millions of dollars a year on EDR and invest that into tooling around better observability and what they're doing in the applications, especially the work we're doing with Spring coming in for observability. They're like, the platform just held up. The containers and the VMs were solid, and that's going to be a really fun attack analysis of the platform that I don't know if an hour will be enough for. So we'll have to like intertwine that into our world of monthly diarrhea conversations.
Yeah, I was involved in that one, and I'm looking forward to that talk because they did some interesting stuff, and it goes to, we always say Cloud Foundry, Taz, which by the way, Taz is changing names again. But we always say it's secure by nature, right? It was great to get some, outside confirmation of that when they went through their attacks. And I'm looking forward to that talk, right? How did they do it? What did they look for? And why did they reach the conclusion that they did? I mean, being able to save millions, that's got to make everybody happy, even though they may not get to check that box, right?
What I'm expecting is they're not really saving millions. They're actually going to reinvest it. Why pay for a product that's going to get you a dashboard and output when you can actually pay? Think what I could do with 4 million of engineering hours. I mean, that's an annual budget. I could do a lot, even if it was $1 million. There's so much you could do with the tools available now that I'm excited that they did the analysis and they actually validated with a real red team, people who know the environments from not from a black box, from a white box point of view of actually, we know the knowledge, we have administrator access, we have root, we know the environment. What's the risk to it? How is it really protected? We've said for years it's secure. But it's always nice to get validation. And it doesn't discount, the whole vulnerability and lifecycle management, making sure it's up to date and having the proper architecture and controls, because that was a big part of it. Actually, the platform is one thing, but where you put it, how you access it, what you put for boundary and all those things around it, the architecture is just as important. And being a global financial company, they had that in mind, and that was part of their analysis. Now,
I know you're doing a talk. Are you going to work with them to try to come up with a white paper based off of this?
I think it's more than that. There's actually another customer out of the EU that similar, not just a white paper, but where are we with our recommended architecture? How do we recommend you deploy these platforms? How do you use them in such a way that you can make the maximize the benefit of the inherent controls you're getting without the risks of other things around it? Like little things like you should only have ingress to your Go routers or to your TCP routers and maybe a jump box for administrator. You shouldn't have just wide general access to all the things in the platform.
Yep.
Just little things like that in the architecture.
Well, and that's something I think is going to be great coming from, this segment that we're going to do monthly, because we've got, just the platform itself. There's also the things to talk about when we start talking about what you run on the platform, right? Mm-hmm. Nick's baby. We always talk about you want cattle, not, pets, but Nick's pet is AI. And we've got the Gen AI tile coming up, but there's security some concerns around AI as well. So, what are we looking to do that? I think that's going to be great for the next segment. Something to think about, DMZ, when you come up.
Oh, we've already got, AI, it's data, it's binding, how you access, who has rights and permissions, all the, because it's, who was I talking to recently? Actually, I think there's one of our internal AI talks from Tuesday, from one of our internal Tanzu Lives, but they were talking about the idea of, that GPU is the commodity now. It's like it used to be when you had virtualized worlds. It's like CPU is that resource, the memory, the CPU, or the tight resources. We had virtualization, made that easier. Now we have GPUs, and there's only so much memory in a GPU. So like that whole idea of context switching and sharing the GPU, that's the bottleneck now. So when an AI model comes in, there's a question of, well, access, permissions, what data goes where, how can you get it into there, and more than that. Oh, Johnny. That'll be that segment, definitely.
Yeah. So I don't know, on kind of reference to Deshaun's comment, if you haven't seen there's this meme or whatever going around. It's like the H in Kubernetes stands for happiness. So I like the play on that there, Deshaun.
Yep.
That was clever. But no, I think it's gonna be a great conversation on AI. That's a big piece of it is how do you do that? And I think there's a lot that we can get into, but there's also some top of mind things we wanted to start off with, I think, today with recent CVEs and just how do we talk about the lifecycle part of the platform. I don't know if you wanted to,
absolutely
that yet or not, but it's just something that to me is still top of mind because customers are asking about it now too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it was announced earlier this week, CVE 22279, right, came out. So it's an RFC issue that attacks that right now, at least according to Cloud Foundry and Tanzu Application Service, it's vulnerable due to the Go router because it is in Golang. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Tell us about the CVE and what people can expect from it.
Yeah, so I'll give a little history first. So there's always interesting things when it comes to protocols. The last probably 8 months or so, there's been an interesting subset of research into HTTP protocols, proxies, the way that there's just more visualization to this, and not necessarily Cloud Foundry is driving this. I think it really is being driven a lot by the Kubernetes world and ingress, and the fact that we now have such easy access. It used to be we had Cloud Foundry, we had the Go routers, that was a large model there, but realistically, the rest of the world was on VMs, and they're having regular load balancers, and the control and the mapping of ingress was that way. As we go to Kubernetes, we have large at scale layer 7, proxy-based ingress mechanisms now. So over the last 8-10 months, you started seeing HTTP protocol issues. You've seen various things coming out. And about, let's see, what was this? This was about 3-4 weeks ago, in that range. One of our customers actually had a bug bounty. A researcher actually in the vein of doing these protocol analyses found something that was not behaving like people expected. In the end, what was found is, and technically I can kind of share what it was, what really ended up happening here, is the RFC deals with how do you in an HTTP stream handle continuation and keep alives from a client on one side, and then the back side, which would be a proxy or other types of connection. But we're using it as a proxy, but there are other ways of doing that layer 7 connection. But the way that the continuation happens and the way that the connections and buffers work when there are failed methods, and the methods can be your get, your post, your delete, the different things, options. But generally, you're going to have things turned off for your applications. Like you would have support for get or post, but maybe not have options or delete or whatever it might be. If you set an invalid method with the continuation, because of this proxy connection, it gets mixed up. And then not your stream, but other streams that are being handled by that proxy start getting connection problems. So it's really in that protocol layer of handling errors in the connections between the internal keep alive, the external keep alive, and that what's called the 100 continuation. It's the header variable for continuing that connection. And that's the technical side of what happens. Now, because this is in the protocol, I do want to point this out. We discovered in the implementation of Go that actually implements the Go router, that the mechanisms of how Go and the Go router handle this is part of what the problem is. But this isn't just a Go problem. This is how do you look at the RFC and how do you handle the sort of situation? So we don't have, other language or this was Go. This was our situation. But I do want to point out for others out there, if you have layer 7 proxies and you have 100 continuation, you have this sort of situation, it's possible other implementations might be vulnerable. So we do have some information we can share at some point with some of the RFC stuff. But that's the big piece of this was bigger than just us and Cloud Foundry and Go router. It could be, in fact, other things out there. But in the gist of it, we being the Cloud Foundry team, not me, I wasn't the developer who did it. I'm not that smart. I just talk smart on TV, going back to our diarrhea channel. But the actual issue comes together, and what happened is the Cloud Foundry team, what they ended up doing, that we looked at a lot of different options for this. One option that came up in conversation was, what if we just have the like a load balance, like an F5 sitting in front, just if it sees 100 continued connection, just drop the packet or send a reset. Part of the problem comes in the fact is this is a protocol. So if you're going to drop that 100 continue, you have to give a specific error message back. I think it's 416. I forgot what the actual error is. You have to look in the release notes to find that out. But there's an actual error that has to be handed back to the source. So the source can go, oh, that wasn't allowed. I can retransmit without the continue on fine. So what ended up happening is the Go router actually implemented a process where if it sees the 100 continue, it sends back the proper error code. So the original source can retransmit without the error code, and then it works fine. And the customer we were working with had, out of a couple hundred applications, I think it was around 16 or 20 that actually used 100 continue, tested it fine, didn't break anything, worked out fine. And the patch came out. And for those who are paying attention to the Tanzu world, we had our first advisory of the year as a Broadcom affiliated advisory. So that's a first roadmap for us. For those who are using our Taz platform, which is now Tanzu platform for Cloud Foundry, or for those who are keeping track of things, you can put the T small as PCF, since they're on the same thing. Anyway, you're going to see a gap on the Broadcom support side. We because of the acquisition, we have not had security advisories from December until our day 2, which was in the end of, like just a month ago. And we just got our first advisory. So there is a backlog for those who are paying attention. We will be populating the backlog of this year's USNs. So if you go to the Cloud Foundry organization, you see the advisories they have there. We'll be getting parity with that with Taz over the next few weeks as we get these advisories published now. So, but this is the first one that's really worth watching.
So man, a whole lot of information there, David. Let's start breaking this down a little bit. So first and foremost, we've seen this in Cloud Foundry. We've seen this in Tanzu Application Service. Tanzu Application Service is patched. Cloud Foundry has got a patch release in the routing release that fixes this. But for customers that see this on their foundations, like you said, you're going to want to check your Nginx's, your .NET frameworks, anything that's going to use a proxy out there that accepts these headers. You need to double check and make sure that they're sticking with the that they're modifying the RFC, right? Because this isn't really just a typical like backdoor or something. It was the way that the RFC was worded that really kind of led to this. Is that right?
Yeah, and I want to be very clear. This is not a backdoor. This is not a remote executable. This is not an RCE. This is only a potential denial of service. But from my testing, I could easily load basically 20 lines of code in my burp browser, aim it at a Cloud Foundry foundation, and say fire off 1,000 threads and just go repeated, and I will disrupt all the communication on their platform. It will just totally make things unusable. So it's an easy exploit, but it's not remotely exploitable. It's denial of service. So that's the first thing. I want to cover that. But yes, it is a protocol issue. We have not validated it's actually in other implementations. It's just the potential exists because it's a confusing RFC. And we're just raising the flag that it's potentially in other languages and other implementations of this RFC. We don't know for a fact.
So what is the likelihood? How hard is this to exploit in your opinion? I mean, is this something that's fairly easy to exploit? Is it kind of difficult?
No, it's easy. It's you could script it with a curl command. And just have it on repeat, fire off 12 threads in the background and keep repeating it and basically cause a site to have significant amount of lost connections.
Okay.
So it's relatively trivial to exploit, and it impacts other users of the platform. So we didn't do a significant amount of testing of different routes if it only impacts one route at a time. So we didn't go down that big rabbit hole of the biggest scope it could have. We were able to identify and prove it worked and replicate the issue across a single tested URL. So that's actually an interesting question that I will have to see if I can deploy an older version and do some tests, but I don't know if it impacts everything at once in all the routes or if it's just the route you're targeting. I don't know that one right now.
Okay. Well, and when you look at like the Broadcom advisory, there's some workarounds in there. I know that you and I have talked about these, like you can reject the inbound request for expect 100. There's also disable the HTTP keep alives. Are those good options for workarounds, or is this something that's really, hey, we don't have time to get the patch in right this second, but we want to take advantage of this. We don't want to leave it open.
So I'd be very nervous at that first one, just rejecting the connection, because to reject it by protocol, you have to give the proper error code back. So to do that, you would have to actually configure something in either an HA proxy in front, or something that can actually receive the full header, get the connection, and then send the proper connection rejection back. That's a little bit more complex, and I'm not sure it could be done, but I'd be nervous of that sort of fix, just because it is complex. How do you actually test it and validate on the protocol layer? The second one, the keep alive, is definitely an easy. We validated that when we tested it as part of our test. With the customer we were working with, though, they were doing several 100,000 connections per second. And the problem when you take off the keep alive from the Go router to the AIs is that means we're now doing more connections, which means you're having the MTLS connection on that connection, which means there's a little bit extra CPU overhead. And the recommendation, if you're going to disable keep alive from the Go router to the AI, is to expand your Diego cell or memory just to make sure you can handle the extra CPU and resource needs. The customer we were working with, they were such a load that they were concerned of actually having performance impaction. So, and that is, if you disable keep alive, you do have a performance impact.
Okay.
They decided to wait for the patch. So it is a valid solution. And if you are extremely high load, we're talking hundreds of thousands of AIs type environment, you're doing tens of thousands of connections per second type of thing, you might want to sit down and do some math first and see what do you need to make sure you have the proper resources, and you can do that just like regular upgrade planning. Now, doing the keep alive means you're also going to do apply changes. So you have to be ready to do the change and actually push it back out to your environment, disabling keep alive. If you're able to, I would recommend upgrading. And there are upgrades for all of the supported versions of TAS. In Cloud Foundry, you do have the networking release. So from the Cloud Foundry side, the customer we were working with, they actually did the networking release. They did the BOSS release for it and tested it that way. It is not, if you're a TAS customer, it's not recommended to run the networking release by itself, because then you have a non-standard config of networking release that Opsman might overwrite and cause problems in there. Right. So we do recommend, if you're a TAS customer, do the full upgrade. If you're on Cloud Foundry on the open source side, you can consume the networking fees, and you should hopefully have your own automation around managing your upgrades and your system support of your Cloud Foundry if you're open source.
Okay, so there's options out there. You got to weigh the options. There's some workarounds. The real answer is to go ahead and get the patch. When we're looking, Cloud Foundry, you can do the release. On the the commercial side, the TAS side, you can also do the patch upgrade. Now, since this is just a patch upgrade to the routing release, you don't need to run a full apply. You just need to run it against the TAS tile, right? So that should reduce your ability, or your requirements for time frame to update it. It's not a huge update. It's not something that you're going to have to plan hours for, because it is just kind of a routing release. We won't say no op, but we will say low op.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. All right. And we got a question in. Go ahead.
I was going to add one more thing is prioritization. I would definitely recommend prioritizing your internet accessible foundations first. Yep. If it's internal only and you have malicious connections happening, you probably have other things to worry about first. But I would prioritize internet first, because that would be something that could be impacted. Excellent. Or more easily impacted in theory.
All right. And we'll leave it open. If anybody in the audience has questions, feel free to ask them. We are going to post one. So this is unrelated, but Rom comes out. Hey, do you see a future where the CF community is adopting OWASP or Open SSF standards?
Some of that is there. If you look at some of the release teams, there are some generic scan. Now, the OWASP is a little bit. It's weird, because you think about this, it's the open web application, security. So if you think about Cloud Foundry, things like UAA or things in the background, there might be APIs, which OWASP does have API stuff. So in theory, I see what you're saying about the OWASP, but generally, OpenSSF and security standards, those are part of the way Cloud Foundry organizations organized, the way things work. The way we in Tanzu contribute code, we do a lot of our own scanning and release processes. Hopefully we can dig into that in one of these future episodes, because there's some really, really cool things coming. But that's for a more in-depth, when we actually can show some screenshots and actually things doing stuff. But as far as the community, Cloud Foundry has always had a strong security lean toward various things. I don't know of any open scanning, like the Google project where they're scanning open repos. I don't know if Cloud Foundry is part of those. I would. It's worth digging into some on that one, but.
Well, just knowing who Rom is, I'm kind of curious. And Rom, correct me if I'm wrong, if this is really a legit question, or if you're just kind of asking a leading question here to say, hey, we want to know if the community thinks we should put some effort into this or not. We'll wait for Ram to come back, but I suspect that was probably more of a leading question than it was.
Yeah, it doesn't. I don't know Ram personally, so I just looked at once you said that, Nikki. I'm like, oh, let me see. Oh, that's who Ram is. Okay, so I am guessing it's a leading question. I have not.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. Since even my days in Pivotal, I've been doing a lot of the commercial side. So I've not leaned into the Cloud Foundry organization and what security day to day is happening in the organization. I will make a note that I need to be doing that anyway, because it just makes sense as we as a Tanzu world are putting more effort to helping Cloud Foundry. It makes sense that we can take whatever we're doing from security and can help the organization as well. So we got the first advisory. Things are going better with Broadcom. So we'll see. Ram, hopefully we can actually get together and I can join Cloud Foundry for one of the, I missed New York, so I'll join the next one and see if we can have a dedicated security session and see where those can go. That'd be a lot of fun, maybe.
Yeah, you missed a hell of a conference there at Cloud Foundry, New York. So it was good. I hope you are able to make the next one, And then just for everybody's, if you're interested in this CVE, all the links that we showed on the screen, we're going to post into the notes at the bottom after the episode. So you'll be able to reach in them, go out and look at the Broadcom advisory. If you're on the commercial side, look at the Cloud Foundry advisory. They're the same, right? So the patches are just where we place them, but they're the same type of patches. And then we'll also take a link to the RFC so you guys can look at that. So
can you send me those links too, by the way?
Yeah, absolutely.
On the side.
Yep. So what else is new, David? I know that we've got a new white paper out about compliance with security in TAS.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one. There's so many things happening. The white paper, actually, what that is not really new. For anyone who has some of the history of TAS, there was a white paper published a couple of years ago. A lot of the security in the Pivotal world was focused on NIST. So all the policies, the way things happen were NIST-based. And a lot of our federal customers also have strong needs of NIST. So the original of those documents were created was based on this. And what happened is, we must have started probably about 8 months ago. We have a bunch of old documents. We need to go back and see how they apply now, and especially things like NIST and 853 and the idea of the new inheritance models. How do actually things inherit and fit together? So that what we did is a first rendition of revitalizing that white paper. What does it mean today? But that's just the first of building blocks. The beginning of the conversation, getting refreshed to where we were up to modern standards is a great starting point. But where I'm excited is where it's going to go next is the idea of how does that inherit to people using things on top. So, an example is for those, it's really interesting how we do things in the federal world compared to like a financial world where it's similar, but not quite the same overarching impact from a regulatory point of view. But in the federal space, as you build a platform, say a Cloud Foundry platform, and you go through and you get that approved for usage, when you're running an application on top of it, the application has if you're doing the NIST 853 and you're doing an application STIG across your application, you can actually inherit a lot of controls from that platform for how you actually manage and control, the building, the releasing, the ingress, all those, the things of running an application. Those controls are provided by that platform. So that inheritance model, the mapping of what the platform provides and the app on top of it, it's a really interesting conversation that is really starting to get built up these days. And I do expect to see in the next few months a second version of that white paper that really goes into, okay, now that you have a basic platform for building and running applications, what does it mean to securely and in a compliant manner deploy an application on top of that platform? What does it inherit, and what do you have to document separately from just that application? And that's really in that NIST 853 application security world, but is so strongly tied to healthcare and finance and other global regulations. They're all so similar. So while it is very U.S. federal focus, I think it's going to apply to just about anybody who's using these platforms to deploy applications.
Well, and that's an interesting point because we talk about that quite a bit with the federal space, right? How the platform can help their authority to operate, how it can reduce that time, because like you said, the platform provides those controls. So once you validate the platform, the applications that go on it have a reduced time frame for ATO. Now, as part of the white paper, we've got new things that are coming out, right? We've got the FIPS, compliant stem cells that are coming out to increase security there. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm kind of putting you on the spot. I know we didn't talk about this to begin with, but those are other things that go just beyond the federal space. Banks and like you said, healthcare can take advantage of some of the new features that we've got coming in, the new stem cells, the FIPS compliance.
Well, again, there's so much of an overlap. So FIPS is one of those weird ones. Generally, commercial world doesn't like FIPS because of the release process. So FIPS is basically just, for those who don't know FIPS, FIPS is I don't want to quote the acronym wrong, but it's basically the U.S. federal encryption standard. So it's what algorithms, what's libraries, the way you use the algorithms, how they're approved, and what's approved. It's down to the point of, like, they'll approve the specific library and a specific function within that library is the FIPS part. And you may have a bunch of other libraries that you can't use within FIPS. So this has really gotten interesting. We can lead into the Spring world and some of the things that are happening in Spring with some of that validation soon. But within FIPS, because it's down to the protocol, the library, and the actual functions, the validation process actually is a process to validate those functions. So if there's a change in FIPS or there's a change in your actual code for your algorithms, the new version has to go through a validation process, which it's government, U.S. government. It's not going to be like next week. It's going to be 6-8 weeks out for getting that validated. So if you're a business like an insurance company or a bank, and there's an encryption change, you don't want to wait 8 weeks to change encryption. You want to make sure you're on the latest, greatest patches and up to date. So there's this question of how do we make something that's FIPS compliant but drives the need of customers? And one of the conversations we have is, well, there realistically is one library release. There's one that's FIPS validated, and there's this middle ground of, if there's an update, our commercial customers will receive the update and consume it because they don't have that FIPS restriction. Our government customers will take a letter, and they might take the upgrade and be out of, quote, compliance while they're waiting on it from a security risk point of view if it's a big enough thing, or they'll have to wait until new things come out. So FIPS is one that's really weird because it deals with that. But the rest of it, you start looking at STIGs, or you look at the NIST frameworks. PCI, I spent many years in PCI. PCI is strongly associated to the NIST frameworks. There's a lot of history between the two. As I mentioned, Pivotal, all of our policies were NIST based, and only half of our business was federal. So it's not just a federal standard. It does apply in a lot of places. But if you look at STIG, look at CIS, the two kind of standards. There's also ISO and other ones, but they're very similar. I don't want to say like a percentage, but I will. It's somewhere between 80 and 90% similarity between most of these STIGs. And the work we're doing for bringing FIPS into a system also means we're going to bring the STIG, because the STIG requires FIPS, which is required by NIST 853. So it's like these inheritance down the chain of all these different requirements. So the work we're doing for FIPS relates to our work for STIG, which relates to our work for NIST 853, which is our federal stuff, which, because 853 is similar to PCI, helps our PCI customers. Now, the hard thing comes in is our PCI customers they typically need CIS. You can point them to STIG, but generally CIS is more of a standard. This is a non-federal space. It's more of international. We do have both. The nice thing about Cloud Foundry is we do both STIG and FIPS. Both are out there. We have some new compliance documentation that if Nick, if you have time to go search in Tanzu security space, you'll see Nitin had shared a new document today. So there's a whole bunch of work going into just updating all of these documents, because 853 has a new release that's going to be coming in effect next year, which deals with some of these extra inheritance controls and just tightening things up in general. PCI version 4 came out this last year, but there's a lot of controls going in place next year in 2025. So just getting ready for all those things and making sure that all of our documentation is up to date. But similar to all of those is, how do we help customers actually consume and report and document all that? And that's one of my talks to explore, is how do we actually deal with actually making reports and getting all those things out there. And we are definitely going, I think we are leaning to the darknet diarrhea, all these acronyms. I'm sorry, it just really is fitting with what's coming out.
I'm keeping up with you. So Nick, from you're a product marketing engineer. I mean, what are we seeing from customers coming in? Is this stuff that is top of mind for them? Is this stuff that, hey, it's great that we're addressing this, but we're having problems implementing? What are you seeing from the marketing side?
I think it really depends on the business vertical, right? I mean, obviously within the Cloud Foundry space, we have a lot of folks in the financial world and kind of government sector, so they're probably always going to be more, have more regulatory, I guess, concerns or care about this more than, I guess, someone in a less regulated industry. But even then, like, if you go from like a retailer space, I used to work for a large retailer, and all these things were also very, needed for us too, as in PCI, HIPAA, all these things. So it's all good things to have, especially when you just say this is baked in within the platform. We just follow our normal cadence, and we can push this, remediate the CVE within and apply changes, and we're good to go type of thing.
So Nick, I'm gonna throw out the baked in the platform. I want to throw a shout out to Rita and her throwing salt and cooking and everything we're talking about. I think the idea of table stake security and those default secure. One of the phrases I do like to bring up, that when someone brings up default secure, it's always usually it's secure by default, and I say it's just the opposite, default secure. One of the intents I'm trying to get with that mindset is, like, we ship the stem cells in Cloud Foundry and Taz, they are not secure by default. They're default secure. We've shipped them immutably based. We've disabled services. They come default with those intentions of a security mindset applied to the default configuration. It's already there. Now, there are more things you can do. There are things you can do in the configuration of Cloud Foundry and Taz to add more things to it. But we do ship with a default secure mindset versus secured by default, which means you are securing it by default, not being shipped default secure. And that's just a mindset I think is important to think about. And I reached out to Ram to talk to him when we do get a chance to run in. I think this is a mindset of how do you approach products? How do you approach projects? Right. And security is, we've always known you could either throw it over the wall and treat it as old school, like waterfall, where it's like, here's your responsibility now, you take care of it and tell me what I got to do later. Or you come back to the idea that everybody has something to do in security, and how do we make sure that we have that mindset, that default secure mindset toward whatever we're working on. So all the work we're doing for the STIGs, the FIPS, so that all these the compliance and documentation, and Nick, you mentioned retail has PCI and other things. I'll say even our manufacturing and people who don't have, they might have ISO compliance or other things. There's compliance in so many worlds, but even if you don't care about the compliance, the idea that I don't know of a single business that wants to put their customers or their customers' data at risk. Right. Anybody, no matter what industry you're in, the first and foremost thing for any business is protect your customer.
Well, they'll only not do it once, right? First time they get that big breach, then they've got to pay and lose the reputation. They're only going to do that one time before they take it seriously. So,
well, it gets expensive, if you're in. It's been a couple of years since I was a QSA, and back when I was tracking this, and I'll have to give a shout out to the Jeff over on Security Weekly. He's still a QSA, so maybe he can chime up one day and share. But it was around $300 or $400 per card loss. So if you are a moderate-sized business and you don't purge your card data, and you have 100,000 cards in your database that gets compromised, even if it's $400 a card, that's a lot of money. Yeah. So that in itself might impact you. So,
well, and you talked about the STIG standards. Going back to the STIG, right? We take that seriously. We've got a tool out there, the compliance scanner, that does that will go in and give you a view into what your STIG, what your processes look like, what the benchmarks are, and that's something, again, it's such an important factor that there is a product to do just that. I know you talked about the compliance scanner, I think, on the last episode when we had with Aqua, but could you talk about it again?
No, I think the compliance scanner is one of those. What I like about the compliance scanner is it's reporting for you on the compliance of your ephemeral image-based deployments. So one thing I talk about with customers on the compliance scanner is you really don't need to and probably shouldn't run it in production if you have a UAT or testing environment that matches production, because you want to run a scan on the equivalent type of hardware. But it really it's a snapshot of the various tests, CIS or STIG, for your VM-based stem cell environment. Now, when I talk to people about compliance scanners, in shops, they're like, oh, we need to have a CIS scan and it needs to be 100% in place. We'll come back to the idea of 100% anything. Like if you are saying I want to be 100%, no vulnerabilities. Our goal is 0 vulnerabilities. Same thing with any compliance thing. You're not going to test everything. And if you look at the CIS benchmark, there's a couple things they're testing. They're like, make sure you're locking passwords if someone enters the wrong password so many times. Well, inside Cloud Foundry, you're using BOSH to SSH. So it's actually creating an account and doing an SSH key. So you're not going to have a possible password being entered incorrectly to lock an account. So that test isn't tested. But then when you get the report, it's going to say this wasn't tested. And it gives a reason of why it's not tested, because that's something that's not used inside the system. So one thing that's great about the compliance scanners, it tells you why tests weren't tested or why a test failed, because nothing will be 100% success. Nothing will be 100% passes. CIS, like vulnerabilities, are what's the status and the intent of the system, and then look for things that happen over time that change that. So if a configuration changes that changes your CIS report, then you should watch for that. But you should build a baseline standard for your CIS or STIG and say, this is my standard for this TAS platform or Cloud Foundry, although I'll be honest, this is a TAS tile, so that if it won't necessarily work inside of your Cloud Foundry open source side. So sorry for our Cloud Foundry world on that piece.
But it's the value add of Tanzu platform.
It is. I'm trying to live in the spirit of Cloud Foundry Weekly and not necessarily just talk about Tanzu, but it's one of those things though that you are good. The Cloud Foundry community though is receiving the benefit of the stem cells. The same stem cells that we're providing the reports for, the same ones that are in the open source from the point of view of that. So it's going to have the same hardening, the same remove services, the same configuration options. You just don't have a report for it. But if you want to see what it can be, if you're curious on that, happy to go through the typical CIS reports. In fact, maybe we can have one of our whatever we're going to call this time frame. We can actually go through, what does a compliance report look like? What are you getting from it? What sort of things are default secure inside the platform? That might be interesting for those who don't know the platform as well as y'all might.
Yep. We're gonna bounce out. So Kote's got a question for you that I think needs to be answered. What's running on the screens in the back, especially the one on the ceiling?
So yeah, this is my personal machine, which I'll turn so you can actually see. It's a little computer. But no, this was my personal space. I used to have 4 of these I had 4 of these monitors. So it was 22-inch monitors all across my desk when I had my own data center. I never liked the bezel, so I convinced. This is why I've realized I'm great in the field. I'm good talking to customers. I convinced my wife I needed a 55-inch screen.
Yep,
she agreed. Wonderfully supportive wife. So I got that, and this is just my personal thing. And I run Linux on it, so it's X screensaver. Shout out to Jamie Zawinski. And if you've not seen it, they made a X screensaver for Android and for iPhone, and because Android requires a terms of service. Nikki, if you want to go back into the Tanzu security, you'll find it back there. I don't want to search while I'm talking, but because they have to release a privacy policy, it is hysterical what he put in his privacy policy. He's like, we don't or never will capture your information, like in a link to Google. Google does. So it's like all these things that you like we don't do. And Jamie just like a long time open source. He is the founding of so many thoughts and ideas and so much open source that that privacy policy just cracked me up. It was just a great example. Anyway, this is X screensaver running on Linux, and if you can see in the background, I got my servers running in the rack server here next to my printer.
So what distribution of Linux are you running?
It is Ubuntu. I used to be a Debian developer years ago. So I was a Debian developer. I maintained PKS, which was the PGP private key server. I maintained the IceCast server. I was a big IceCast streaming server, and actually shout out for the old Shoutcast or Winamp days for those who knew those. Friends of mine were the creators of IceCast, so that was the Debian maintainer for it. And old school streaming stuff, I still have some streaming stuff I play with. It's a lot of fun, but I realized I liked having my GPU drivers and other commercial drivers available, so I had to make the switch to Ubuntu to get that support. And I know there's other operating systems out there, but it's easy, it's done, and I see no reason to change it. I'm lazy.
I do. Mine's not 55 inches; it's 48. It's still a widescreen. It's the best thing I ever bought since getting into computing. But forewarning, if you go down Zooms, never try to share screen. Nobody's going to be able to see that. And thanks, Kote. You completely got us off track here on what we were talking about, from security to nerding out on monitors. But so we did have a question from Ahmed. I did kind of answer this in chat, but is the rating for the CVE still medium? Any potential for it to be bumped higher? Right now, it's still a medium. No known plans that I'm aware of to bump that up any. Anything you got in insight there?
Yeah, if you look in the CVE, you'll give the link to the calculator. If it's not in there, I know the link is in the Tanzu advisory. Because this is not a remote executable, this is not a compromisable thing. The way that CVEs are calculated, it came out as a medium. If it's a higher price, now one thing I recommend, this again, because we didn't start talking about CVEs, but one of the things just like the compliance conversation, there's nothing with zero CVEs, but also you as a business should not just take a CVE rating and drive your risk program based upon what third parties have said about that risk for you. Your risk program should look at that CVE, get details from your vendor on what that really means, and then you should have a risk rating for your business on that vulnerability. And that's what you should drive your program on. So, for example, the bank we were working with on discovery of this, it was a medium rating, but because it's trivial to exploit and because there's such a high load on the platform, they internally set a time frame of, I think it was less than 48 hours when the patch was available, it had to be out there. So it was really fast. They drove it internally with their own risk ratings. So theoretically, because it's not a remotely executable, the risk calculation, we tried to tweak it to make it a little bit higher, but it came out to a medium because that is a 6.7, I think is what it came out to as CVS 3. So I think that's kind of where it came to, but definitely you should have a conversation about what the risks are for denial of service for your business. For banks, most banks, if they're offline for 48 hours, can possibly have an OCC or FDIC interaction. They could actually have a write-up from the regulators and possibly impact their business. So denial of service is a risk for a bank. Some businesses, they may not have, like there's power companies I work with that have the TAS platform. They're completely offline. You can't access the platform. There is no risk for them. So when it comes to risk rating, you have to make sure you know what the risk is for your business for these vulnerabilities. And if you need questions like we're talking about here, we have customers reaching out, and I'm actually getting down to their security team, showing them how to actually test and validate this so that they can determine what the risks are for their business, not just on the TAS platform, but also, as I mentioned earlier, there could be other layer 7 proxies that might be vulnerable, and how can they scan and test this themselves? I've got some friends at Qualys. Actually, we've got a former TKG PM lead who used to be a security PM, who's actually one of the PM leads over at Qualys now. We got friends at a couple other security companies, and I'm going to reach out to Qualys first and a couple others. Because this was so focused in the finding of the protocol and Go, I don't know if a security company like Qualys has yet picked up the idea of scanning for this type of exploit. So I'm going to reach out to a couple of them over the next week or so and see if these big scanning companies have ways of identifying this, because it's similar to that HTTP, HTTP request smuggling that we went through a few months ago, and it's come up in the last few months. But I don't know if anyone's actually looking at this use case yet. So sorry if it didn't help you with that answer, but if you have any detailed questions, just reach out. And if it's Tanzu, happy to help. If it's not Tanzu, reach me on LinkedIn, and I can help as much as I can.
And that's one of the great things. I mean, it's a small world, right? We know people that have either been in Pivotal, been in VMware, that have gone to other places. Everybody still loves the product, so we all still talk. It's great. If you've got questions on this, we've got his LinkedIn. His LinkedIn will also be posted in the show notes. But reach out to me or Nick. Reach out to DMZ. If you still got questions that we're not answering here, and I'm sure, David, once you get some answers back from the scanning on other products, you'll post that out to LinkedIn, let people know. So make sure you follow DMZ on LinkedIn.
I will say there's a new security blog link right here. Here, I'll share it with you, Nikki, so you can have it. So I am trying to get more active in our blog posts. A couple actually interesting things with that. What was motivating me to get more active in blog posts is Tanzu has a weekly product update that comes out. Here are the releases this week. Here's things happening, kind of release notes and things for the week. And I wanted to have a really security-centric point of view to that. Because there are a lot of release notes, and it's not just CVEs. I wanted to approach it from the security risk governance point of view. Things like, in the last week, we had a new GreenPrum release. And that it's RabbitMQ, sorry. And inside that RabbitMQ release is actually a FIPS compliant release. So while that's not security, it was a governance type thing. And similarly, we had the application management coming out of the Tanzu platform that has SBOM and other features included. So one thing I'm doing is every week I'm working with a release team to document those security-centric points of view. Similar on the blog that Nikki shared here, or Nick shared, I'm trying to somewhat regularly have security posts. In fact, I have one, and hopefully we can get Mark Fines on here talking about this. He has some such cool demos. He shared a demo this last week. I have a weekly security office hours internal inside Tanzu that's been going on for probably 5 years now. And within that, Mark shared this really cool idea for log ingestion. I know logs are a big thing inside Cloud Foundry. The log aggregator is the history of where it's going, the whole changes on that. But also there's a tendency of customers to say, hey, we've got all these logs. What do we do with it? So the blog post I'm working on is taking his example. I'm going to give a little teaser on it right here, since we've got everybody here, is really going to go into some of the Spring data flow stuff. And Mark actually gets a deployed instance inside TAS, redirects the logs in TAS to that, and then you can actually set up threads like, here's the UA logs, here's the CredHub logs, here's the OpsMan logs. And it's actually different threads which can then be sent to different, like let's send the UA logs off to this one SIM. Let's send this. So it's a way of actually breaking those logs apart by different threads they might be into it. So I'm super excited about that as a potential, because if you have the Tanzu platform, platform, as a product. You get Spring, you get these features, and it's just another way of looking at how do I ingest and process logs, because the Cloud Foundry platform has, 400 gig of log a day application on it. And I'll throw that out to any of our Cloud Foundry development teams. We got to fix that. That's not helpful to anybody.
Well, I've seen what Findsy was doing, and it is a very interesting concept, right? So within Tanzu Application Service, there is a function where you can go in and use Rainier script to kind of split those logs out from a syslog perspective.
And it's a pain.
But we give very little documentation on it. We expect people to know Rainier script, which is most people don't. And it can be problematic. So I think Findsy's approach, and Findsy does some really great things, but Findsy's approach makes that a lot simpler. And yeah, I honestly think this is something that we should look at going further with to kind of split that out. Because you're absolutely right. Those people that are running, those customers that are running Datadog, man, they don't necessarily like Taz shipping all the logs, especially if they're not putting any limits on them.
I've actually seen Splunk teams, like it just I think causes minor heart attacks. You turn it on, it's like the GDP of a small nation. Like
yeah. It's not just that we're getting all these logs, it's also that, the guy that's got to write the bill to Splunk for that usually gets a little upset with us too.
Well, that's an interesting question. Maybe we can dig into that some in the future. And I'd love to have the audience kind of guide that conversation. Just the whole idea of, well, what do you look at? There's so much happening. It goes back to the idea that the one Spring Talk we're going to do on the EDR conversation of what you monitor. What do you look at? What do you monitor? What's useful? There's so much data, not just in Taz or Cloud Foundry as a platform, but then once the applications start running, there's work going on. So you're running a Spring app, and I think we just released the governance module for that. So if you have, again, if you're using Cloud Foundry and you have the Tanzu side of it, and you have Spring, you have now the governance module. And say you're a business customer, what the governance module does is allows you on your Spring applications to say, I'm going to add this one WAR. It's the Tanzu governance WAR, and say I want to enforce FIPS. And from a developer's point of view, any FIPS is required for anywhere you're storing with encryption, i.e. passwords, you're doing hashes and such, or if you have transmission where you have to do encryption for the data. So what the Spring commercial module does is it enforces that. It makes you use the proper TLS, the proper libraries, proper functions. And that module is being expanded into the rest of NIST and the rest of PCI. So you can actually imagine, not only are we doing the compliance of the platform, but now we've got into the application layer. You're starting to get that compliance discussion on what's your posture of the application. Are you using proper encryption, proper connections? Are you doing an LDAP connection for your authentication, or is it LDAP-S? Does that really matter? Well, if you remember Log4j, that was an LDAP injection. So even though it was a logging problem, a lot of the things people are attacking were going through LDAP. So the idea that we can have a module inside of a Spring app that watches these sort of things and configures it. And there's so much more that's coming down the line of the observability side of applications, but also the observability side of platforms. And how do you tie those together? I'm a huge fan of what Wiz has done. And I'm hoping that we, since we in the Tanzu world have a view really of everything from the application to the platforms to the way they all go together. And when we say application, we mean like the big A app, the idea that an application doesn't just run in one cluster. The idea of even in the Kubernetes model, like very small companies might have one Kubernetes cluster with a couple pods running. But realistically, if you're a business and you have more than one real function you do as a business, you're going to have more than one cluster. And how do you look at your business across that? How do you tie it together? And that's going to be really a lot of interesting things when it comes to compliance and certificates and authentication and binding. And how do you manage that? One of the biggest fears I had when I was a CISO was who has access to the authentication data. You would typically have, you did data last week. The idea of you build a database, the traditional DBA model is, okay, well, I've got a database. I'm going to create a root password and email it to this guy over here so he can then, take that password and then do his stuff with it or her stuff with it. And it's like, that's scary because now you have your root password in an email system. Maybe that gets backed up to Azure or who knows where. Or maybe when someone gets malware and their hard drive gets compromised, you just lost your root password to your database. And it makes you wonder, was it Snowflake? A couple customers on Snowflake just got compromised recently and had massive data leaks. And Snowflake is like, no, it's not our system. That was something else. And there was this other thread around. Maybe it was administrator at Snowflake that had their credentials compromised. And there's a lot of questions that hasn't really fully come out yet. If anyone goes out and Google Snowflake and security, you'll start seeing a couple of these large customers that had problems. But this is a big concern. How do we actually do that? And I think the binding story we're leaning into of how do we actually get data connected to the right apps, the right people. And then also, how do you rotate those credentials? How do you manage, the credentials for people? It's not just getting a connection, But if your DBA, in the past, if you emailed that password and you had a DBA change, or you had administrator change, or a developer change, well, now you have to change a new password, email that password back out again, manage that. It's that whole binding together of the passwords and management of rotation of passwords is critical, and that goes back to our 3 R's, which are now the 4 R's. The idea that we've gone from the 3 R's to adding onto it the replication, the expansion into one foundation. It's just a huge conversation. And
we've got a lot of work that's going in, a lot of free work that's going into this. We look at, some of the things getting put out. We've got the Spring Health Assessment Report to get vulnerabilities that are coming within your Spring code. We've got the OSS Health Report that's looking at your OSS deployments and seeing what kind of, vulnerabilities and misconfigurations you got in that. These are free tools. There's a lot of work going on. Like you said, a lot of CISOs, a lot of app, managers or app teams want to be able to see, what does my security look like, soup to nuts? And we're coming out with, some stuff that will hopefully give you that single pane of view. What does the platform look like from a CVE perspective, components down to the runtime? So, stay tuned, because I think there's going to be some interesting things coming within this year for customers that are looking to really get a good eye on their security story.
I think in the next quarter, we're going to see a lot of stuff. I don't think we have to wait a year for that.
Right.
And what I think is more exciting is the idea that not just what are the vulnerabilities, but what does it mean to you? From my point of view, we're talking Tanzu here. What does it mean to you as a Tanzu customer? If you have Cloud Foundry, we are providing the stem cells, the build packs. You're building your applications from, which make a blob that has the runtime that comes from the TAS tile, the CF Linux, and then you have the whole open source, the Kubernetes world. All those pieces we build. So not only what are the vulnerabilities, but how do you fix it? Who's responsible? Is it a platform engineer who has to provide an upgrade to a build pack? Is it a developer that has to restage an application? Or is it a developer that has to actually update their dependencies using Dependabot or something like that? So having that guidance of, knowing the vulnerability is one thing, but having the guidance on who's responsible and, is this a partner upstream problem? Is this something I have to take care of from a platform? Who can do what? That's actually one of the bigger questions. If you look at any security team, they're like, oh, cool, we see vulnerabilities, but who's responsible? Is it us as a business? Is it our partner's responsibility? Is it upstream Cloud Foundry? Who has to take care of this is the biggest question that comes around it, and we need to be able to answer that faster.
Yep. And when you look at, the applications, it's both the beauty and the detriment of build packs. Is build packs give you everything you need to get your code up and running, but the build pack contains a lot of stuff. So when that build pack update comes out, why did it come out, right? Did we update, did we fix a CVE in Java 8 or Java 11? Did we fix a CVE in one of the, the other dependencies that are within the build pack? So, what you state there is something that I think's on the mind of a lot of developers is, okay, well, I use a build pack to do this. A CVE comes out. Is this something I can expect from the build pack to help resolve it, or do I have to go into my code? So if we can give customers something of what they're viewing at runtime for their application, right? Bring in that Spring Health Assessment, bring in, the build pack and what's being fixed in the build packs, and say, hey, here's your vulnerability. Here's where you go to fix it. Or here's what you got to wait on for it to get fixed. I think that's going to be huge for developers and really for a lot of security teams to be able to know exactly where their risk and exposure is, but also what the mitigation is going to be for it.
I think it's going to reduce a lot of toil too. One thing we have to remember is getting the information now is takes time. There are teams that I'm working with that have, these platform teams are so good. If you look at what they're actually doing, the number of people who are doing the amount of scale, like 3 or 4 engineers are doing the work of what used to be hundreds of people. It's amazing what they're doing. And when you say that these people who are super optimized at the running of these large scale platforms, if you're saying that typically they have 20 days a month, 4 or 5 day weeks, right? And this one team I'm talking to spends 1 day a month or 1/20th or 5% of their entire time just doing CVE. What's the CVE? Where's it in the platform? Where's it in the stack? Who's responsible? Just mapping that all out. If that's one engineer out of a 3-person team, and it takes 1/5 of their time, or 1/20th, 5%. Think about the cost analysis across all Cloud Foundry customers. If we can make this where it's just like, here's your report, everyone knows what has to be done. Automation, we can click a button and stem cell just boom comes in. We get a new scan. It clear. So the future is so exciting for me. These are things when I first saw Cloud Foundry. When I first came on, you asked, "What's your first CF push?" And it reminded me of the first time I got really into Cloud Foundry, and I was blown away as someone who in the past has run hundreds of Tomcat servers and of trying to push out updates to that world, and then when I first saw Cloud Foundry, it's like, oh my God, this is incredible. But then being the security person I am, as we started going further down the road, I was like, oh, I wish it had X, Y, and Z. You know what? X, Y, and Z is coming. I'm so excited. It's really here.
Well, and you made the point about automation, being able to reduce the number of resources. I'm gonna Deshaun all over this thing and channel my inner Deshaun, right? He doesn't want to see people on N-1 when it comes to Spring. He wants the latest for exactly that reason. Get the latest security updates, get the latest performance. And Spring is developing tools. They got the App Advisor that helps walk developers through how to do those upgrades. It takes that toil and automates it and puts it out there so that we can get to that goal of keeping everybody on latest, making sure that they're always up to date. And, you're never going to have, you use the term, we want to have zero vulnerabilities. We should change that term to be zero known vulnerabilities, because if we knew about it, it wouldn't be there, right? It wouldn't be a vulnerability.
Even that, I'd be afraid of that one, though. You will always have vulnerabilities. In fact, there are a few things out there that leverage funkiness and how they report vulnerabilities to say there are no vulnerabilities, but nothing has no vulnerabilities. Unless if you build a custom image, you could build something that really minimizes the vulnerabilities. But anything that we have that has open source dependencies, that uses any libraries of any of the open source, you're never gonna have no vulnerabilities. It more is what is the risk of the vulnerabilities? The idea that there's a vulnerability inside Cloud Foundry doesn't necessarily mean that Cloud Foundry is vulnerable or that your app is vulnerable. There's a risk analysis that goes with that you can't just say there's a vulnerability and just take it in the blank and go, oh my God, we've got to upgrade. Well, what's the reality risk of this? Log4j, that was huge. You could actually do some really bad things with it. This latest one, I think it's actually, you should really examine if you have internet accessible things. Is this a risk to your business? And your own risk rating might make it actually high because it's risky for your business. But in general, you've got to see yourself, is this useful? Does your partner, Tanzu for us, or Cloud Foundry upstream, is there something in this that I need to be worried about? And you can't just look at the numbers. You can't just go with the CVEs. You've got to have a quantified version of that applies to you and your business.
Yep. Well, I do agree with you. Well, we're coming up on top of hour. I got one more question for you, DMZ. This is going to be a reoccurring spot on the Cloud Foundry Weekly. What's your idea for how this spot's going to go? What's your take on what the episode's going to look like?
Well, I think there's a couple of different things. One, following off in our last conversation, there are going to be things that are emergencies. Like when Log4j came out, it was like, oh my God, it was like right at Christmas time. It's like, it was crazy. And that sort of thing, we want to make sure we have communication to people. And this, I'm leaning on y'all and Cloud Foundry Weekly as one of those communication channels. If there's something that urgently needs to get out, we're gonna have those sort of communications. That's gonna be one of them. Another's just gonna be these typical, hey, what's kind of new? Because there's so many things changing. There's new documents, there's new procedures. What's the update? What's the status? And we can kind of pull those from the weekly releases or things that are happening. We can kind of tie together what's happening this week, kind of updates and those sort of things. And then there's a longer term things like tying into like Mark finds the whole Spring data flow. How do we what's kind of cool happening in the security space that influences Cloud Foundry users that might be multiple episodes we're going to break down, maybe invite a couple engineers to show how they're doing things, and I'll have like a thread of security based solutions people are doing. So I think there's a couple of different ways we can have conversations depending on what's happening that week.
All right, sounds good. Well, we'll make sure that we try to get things published so people know what we're going to be doing that month with you on the security talks, and make sure that gets advertised out. I think security is going to be an important thing for a lot of people. So I know, but you get what I'm trying to say.
We're all on the same page. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess we're coming up on time. So I do want to thank all of our live viewers today. Appreciate you. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channels, our YouTube channel. We have cloudfoundryweekly.com where we post all of our podcasts. So anything you can do to, engage in our channels. We also have Twitter and LinkedIn. We should probably put links in those for here soon. But that really helps out the show. We're continuing to gain subscribers on YouTube. So thank you. We actually, I think we gained a few just during the show. So it does help and helps, get this reach out more. So we appreciate you tuning in every week and helping out with what you can do from our social media perspective and helping share. And if you have friends, share this with your friends, let them know about the show, and that'll be helpful to us.
Yep, subscribers is what keep us going, guys. So the more subscribers we get, the more important the show becomes. So tell all your friends, your family, people that don't know about, Cloud Foundry, make them come watch so that they get interested in it. It's the greatest product I've ever worked on.
And if you want to make like 100 YouTube accounts and subscribe to our channel, that's cool too. So
yeah, we're not double checking on nobody.
Yeah.
Actually, I do want one last shout out to Deshaun there. That one quote you threw back out of him. Friends don't let friends write Docker files, and we should definitely have a whole session on that one.
Yep, that was me channeling Deshaun again. That's something he says all the time, but absolutely true.
And then you can't, once you use Cloud Foundry, it's really hard to go back using a Docker file. I do agree there, Alexander. Shout out to Alexander as well.
Yep.
All right. I think it's time. We're at 2:05, so we can do a synchronized countdown for our CF by, and then we can end the show. All right. So 3, 2, 1.
CF by.
Bye.